As a Yu-Gi tuber who often talks about competitive events, the Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden and Limited list, and the Yu-Gi-Oh! Metagame, I of course have to make predictions. While I consider myself a fountain of wisdom and knowledge in this game, nobody, and I mean nobody, bats 1,000, and sometimes I get it wrong. When that happens, I like to recap my predictions for some reflection and maybe just a little bit of comeuppance. This is a segment I haven't done in a very long time. I'm talking years here, but it's also one that is fun to make and that people really enjoyed in the past. So what the heck, let's go ahead and run it back. Welcome to another episode of Where Capital G Was Wrong. Where Capital G was wrong. Okay, so obviously Tier Limit didn't win YCS Bologna and I can't claim any victories here, but I still proclaim that it was a really good and savvy pick. Just as I thought, Tier was one of the most popular decks at Bologna because it's incredibly powerful, it is most definitely excellent at going second, and Europeans just absolutely love and adore the deck. So in my opinion, it certainly had the representation to get the job done. Also, it wasn't like the deck completely flopped, as it did have the second highest number of players in the top cut right after Rescue Ace. I felt really good about Tier going into the event because I thought that it would be able to handle the Rescue Ace matchup as well as the much favored Unchained one, and I really thought that those would be its main two competitors. Also, as I said in my prediction video, I figured that Tier was just kind of due at this point, like a kind of a law of averages type thing. Although I was fairly surprised to see some of the really bigger names in Europe like Gabriel Nets dropping the Tier deck in favor of like Labyrinth at the last minute. That was kind of surprising to me. Now on the other hand, sure, I could have just went chalk and picked Rescue Ace to win the event. Oh, such a brave pick. But considering Bestial Runic took the crown, I don't think anyone was really gonna get this prediction right. Where Capital G was right. Did I call a big weekend for Branded, or did I call a big weekend for Branded? Heck, I even specifically said that I wouldn't take any credit for Branded Chimera decks, and look what happened. Branded Despia making it all the way to the semifinals despite only having a single player in the top 64 playing it, and thank you to Victor Ivanov, who was the duelist running the deck. You, sir, made me look like a genius and very smart with your performance. I really felt good about Branded, and if I had to hone in specifically on the subsets, I'd say Branded Synchro or just your plain Jane Branded Despia for two reasons. One, their popularity on Dueling Book really seemed to be spiking leading up to the event, which could be an indicator that people were testing it for the tournament. And two, Branded is still just incredibly powerful, and it really just has one single banlist hit in the TCG, which doesn't even stop Gimmick Puppet FTKs, which was like the entire point of the hit to begin with. Branded can win in numerous ways, whether that be the aforementioned Gimmick Puppet FTK, using tons of removal with big fusion monsters, or even sometimes just throwing out synchros like Bestial Dispatter and Baron de Floor into the mix. Now of course I would be remiss if I didn't mention the deck's absolutely insane follow-up, because so many of the cards just add themselves back to your hand or fetch other cards during the end phase, and of course there is that stupid Mirror Jade effect that blows up all your opponent's monsters during the end phase that doesn't even count as an activated monster effect, which is just absolutely mind-blowing and doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but it is what it is. I think that this weekend's performance shows that Branded Despia has a lot left in the tank. That, or maybe it's just that, you know, this is what happens when you end up getting 12 core booster sets of support because of your lore. With D-Barrier seeing less and less play in side decks, I really feel like Branded is in a good spot right now, and I think that people are gonna look at this deck a little differently moving forward. Where Capital G was wrong. Okay, well, the new gun, Centurion and Fire King, certainly exceeded my expectations. I was technically wrong on two accounts here. First, I said that I didn't think that these decks would be popular and see a lot of play because they were just too new and high-level players would likely be unwilling to drop established meta decks to play them at a massive YCS tournament. Yep, that wasn't true, and I was proven wrong immediately. In fact, they actually opened up the live stream with the Italian national champion playing Centurion, who put on a fantastic display as he beat Infernoble in an absolute thriller of a duel. My second prediction is that they wouldn't do anything notable in terms of the top cut. However, both blew away those expectations, putting 4 players in the top 64 respectively. I was especially impressed by Fire Kings doing this because, as I said in the video prior to this, despite the new structured deck, Fire Kings is not technically at full power yet. Phantom Nightmare brings in much more generic fire and pyro support that the deck can play to boost consistency, and it's actually kind of scary to think that players were willing to play this deck and that they did so well when it really hasn't even reached its final form. Hopefully this excellent performance for both of these archetypes will bring more awareness and more fans to the themes. Where CapitalG was wrong. Oh, my poor beloved Vanquished Soul. Which, side note, I still have max rarity and will definitely be getting those ulti Rock of Vanquishers come February. This prediction isn't actually tied to my YCS Bologna video, but it is still a prediction nonetheless. In my top 5 decks of the metagame post the September ban list, I went out on a limb and staked my soul, at least metaphorically, on Versus by putting it as the 5th best deck of the format. Was I going out on a limb? Yes. Was I taking a pretty big leap? Yes. Was it ultimately accurate? Hell no. In my opinion, Vanquished Soul is one of the coolest and most fun archetypes Konami has created since the inception of the deck building booster sets, and it really does have a lot going for it, like the removal which it has coming out of the wazoo. But despite the second wave of support in Age of Overlord, the deck is still very Raisin reliant, which is the single biggest problem with the archetype. Because of this, and also the third wave of support, which hasn't actually been announced or revealed yet, sometimes you just automatically lose games because you don't see that specific card by your second turn. In addition, I may have slightly miscalculated the theme's matchups against the other common meta decks. Sadly, they're just almost all bad, and believe me, I've tested every single possible matchup that Vanquished Soul can have. For instance, the Rescue Ace matchup is almost unwinnable when they resolve Turbulence because Vanquished Soul doesn't have exactly a ton of pushing power, while the Tyr and the Unchained matchups can be manageable if you're able to make Abyss Dweller. However, the problem with that maneuver is that making it seize on your opening turn almost always means that you're playing very hard into Nibiru, which is something that Vanquished Soul almost never used to do. I still love Vanquished Soul, of course, but competitively, not in the greatest spot right now. Where CapitalG was right. This one hasn't even happened yet, but don't even worry, I'm still going to end up being right. Those Ushizu Millers are going to get banned. I think that those things are just gonzo when it comes to the next FNL list. I thought that Tyr was gonna win YCS Bologna, and that would be Konami's wake-up call to finally hit those cards and ban them out of the game, you know, basically put the nail in the coffin. But I think it's going to happen regardless of the results of that event. To me, as I was watching the YCS feature matches, anytime Tyr was on feature, it really felt like, you know, they were basically like the win conditions of the deck. You know, anytime that Tyr milled those cards, it felt like the deck was completely unstoppable and that it essentially couldn't be beat. However, if it didn't hit them, it felt like it was a, you know, a Yu-Gi-Oh deck that you could actually contain. To me, that just screams too much variance, too much RNG, way too heavy of a luck factor, and cards that people really don't enjoy when they're being used against them. I think that these are going to be the last days of the Ishizu Millers. The Shufflers, I don't know, maybe they'll last a little bit longer, but the Millers definitely feel like they are on borrowed time, and I would bet everything that those cards are going to get banned on the next Forbidden Unlimited list. But those were just some of my crazy and sometimes ludicrous predictions and how they ultimately ended up turning out. If you made any predictions for YCS Bologna, how did those end up turning out for you? Leave it in the comment section below. Also, if you enjoyed the video, give it a big thumbs up. Thank you guys for watching, as always.